Hi, everybody. Welcome to another Prog Report podcast interview. This is Roy. Our guest on this episode is Steven Wilson, who, of course, is back with a brand new album called the Harmony Codex. It's out now. Joining me on the interview is Geoff Bailey. We spoke to Steven about the new album, how you promote a new album these days. Of course, we also talk about Porcupine Tree and a whole lot more. Before we get started, just a reminder, subscribe to our YouTube channel, wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on ProgReport.com and on all our socials. And now our chat with Steven Wilson. How are you, sir? It's been, I checked, the last time we had you on was over 2.5 years ago now, if you can believe.
Oh, wow. What
Yeah.
was that? Was that
I
must have been the previous album, right?
Yeah, we had you on and we did a whole audio file albums podcast and talked about a bunch of different records and that was a lot of fun.
I remember. Yeah. The best sounding records. Is that right? Yeah, I do remember. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it did amazingly well. It has like 85,000 views on YouTube now or something remarkable.
Amazing.
So yeah, it was a lot of fun. Anyway, I introduce you to my colleague here, Geoff, who
Hi, Geoff.
Hi, Steven.
I think
Hi.
he owns every copy of the Harmony Codex in the UK. I think he owns them all.
So you're in the UK, Geoff, are you?
I'm in Belfast, yeah.
Okay.
Although this day last week I was in Earth in Hackney, so I came over.
Wow. You came over for that. Amazing.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic.
Great.
Well,
so what can we talk about today then?
Yeah, well, we hear you have a new record. Yeah, listen, it's always great to have you on and chat not only about the record but about all things music and everything going on in your world. I wanted to start off. Well, first of all, the Harmony Codex is out as we've done this. It's been out a week. Charting looks like it's going to be pretty well for you, so congrats on that. Everything going on with the release of the record has been just outstanding. Anybody that hasn't heard it, which I don't know how you haven't by now, please go check it out. But one thing that I've found interesting has been the rollout of the release. And I know in previous interviews you've talked about how the traditional sort of release 3 singles 3-4 months in advance and do that whole kind of thing it's just not effective anymore. It's useless. And you've done it just real streamlined in a month, right? A single every week and boom, album out. One, have you enjoyed that? Have you found that to be effective? And what influenced that, aside from maybe your views on it, but the type of record it is and everything? Did that also influence doing it this way?
Wow, I mean, there's so much to say about that, really. I'll try and cover as much as I can. I mean, the main motivation. Sorry, let me just close my email so it doesn't ping every 2 minutes. The main motivation for doing it in a fairly short period of time was to try to keep people engaged. And I think one of the things that's become very apparent to me, certainly having gone through the campaign for the last record, The Future Bites, which was not entirely wasn't just down to the promotional campaign. It was also a lot to do with the pandemic. Of course it was, but the bottom line was there was a 9-month period between the first single and the actual release of the album. Now, how do you keep people engaged all that time? Well, you don't. The simple answer is you don't. Particularly, in 2023 or 2020 or 2021, as it was then, there's so much content coming out all the time. And that's not just music, that's movies, TV shows, news, information, whatever the latest fad is. The world of the internet is one where we're constantly bombarded by, or I should say the world of social media is one where we're constantly bombarded by new things, everyday content, things that are trying to catch our attention. You only have to look at the way that most social media platforms are structured, or streaming platforms are structured. So essentially you're watching something, you're listening to something, and already you're being tempted with the next thing that you're going to watch or the next thing that you're going to listen to. Yeah. People who watch this also watch this. People who listen to this also. So immediately you've chosen to engage with something, you're being tempted away to engage with something else. And I've become very aware of that. And of course, The Future Bites was partly about that world anyway, so it was doubly ironic. But the problem was that the album got put back because of COVID, and I struggled to keep people engaged. It was a difficult album anyway, because it was always going to be a divisive one for my fans, because it was much more pop, much more electronic. So it struggled, it struggled to keep people engaged. And I've noticed this generally as a trend. You announce something, as I did 4 weeks ago. I announced the Harmony Codex, or 5 weeks ago now. And you have people's attention, I reckon, for about 48 hours, if you're lucky. If you're lucky. And then the following Monday or the following Friday, Radiohead announced their new album, or whoever it is announced. And basically everyone that was fully engaged with you for those few hours have moved on to something else. So how do you get around that? Well, one of the things I really admire about the world of urban music artists is they quite often do this thing where they just drop an album.
Right.
At a day's notice. Taylor Swift did it, Taylor Swift did it with 2 albums during COVID, Evermore and the other one, I forgot the name of it, Folklore and Evermore. She just dropped them at a day's. Now, okay, it's easy to do that when you're Taylor Swift and the whole world's looking in your direction. I understand it's not quite the same, but there does seem to be a trend, particularly for artists in the urban sort of area, to not have this extended build-up pre-release campaign. And I think they understand that is part of the issue, that you cannot expect to engage people for, more than a few hours if you're lucky, a few days if you're lucky, more than a few hours realistically. So the idea was to keep the campaign this time as focused, as short, and as intense as possible. And the answer to the other part of your question is yes, it seems to have worked very well. I think everyone's talking about the record, and that's all I could have hoped for. And I think part of that is down to the fact that it's been bang, bang, but here's the album, bang, 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 song, and here's the album. So at the moment, I'm fairly confident this was the right decision.
Yeah. A second follow-up to that question actually is, when you're going into then, okay, how am I reaching people on this, right? How am I promoting this during this period? What's the main focus for you? Is it YouTube? Is it the videos? Is it TikTok? Is it Instagram? Is it doing your kind of selfie kind of posts? Where did you find that you wanted to reach people the best, or what was the best for you in reaching them?
I think that the answer to that question, which you might predict, is it's all of them, and that's also part of it. These days is the days when. I remember when I was growing up, an artist would release an album on 1 or 2 formats, vinyl and cassette, and there'd be a single that would come out 3 weeks before the album would drop. They'd put a few adverts in the music press. They'd hire a guy to try to get it on the radio, and that was it.
So much easier.
That was the campaign. That was the campaign. Yeah. Now, of course, the whole world, the whole music world, the whole world generally is kind of fractalized into a million, billion, trillion different kind of avenues that are available to promote something. So you've got websites, you've got bloggers, you've got podcasters, you've got radio stations, you've got streaming platforms, you've got TikTok, you've got Facebook, and they appeal to very different demographics. So as I'm sure you're aware, Facebook now is predominantly the domain of older people. TikTok is more for younger people. Instagram is somewhere in the middle.
That's right.
So you got to hit them all, and you've got to hit them with the right kind of content. So this time I'm fascinated by all this, So not only is it something I need to know for my career, I'm actually genuinely quite fascinated by the whole process and the way things have changed since I was a kid, several times over. And this time around, I hired a company to basically look after my socials, because it's such a complex area that is changing, month by month. And yes, I could just go to Facebook and I would probably reach most of my core fan base. But of course, I want to reach new people. Who doesn't, So the best way to reach new people is to appeal to them on different platforms, younger people, and that's TikTok. So this time around, something I never thought I'd be doing, creating content for TikTok. And you know what? It's working. It's crazy to me. It's working. Yeah. And so I think the answer is, you got to do it all. And I've always said that I make the music in a vacuum. I don't listen to anyone. I don't take anyone's, what they're expecting into consideration. But once I've finished the record, I'm very happy to go out and play those games. You can tell I like talking. I like meeting fans. I like talking. I like the promotional process. And I think it's always different every time. It's always moved on to a different area every time I release an album.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to do that these days. There's a lot of artists that still think about it like it was 20 years ago. They put out a record and they go, "Okay, everybody, go listen to it," and then they just.
Well, most rock
it's
artists,
hard.
yeah, most rock artists, unfortunately, I think that's where the whole kind of world of urban music is way ahead of rock, and why rock music is quickly becoming a cult. It's becoming an underground cult form of music, because I think, as you say, a lot of rock artists still think it's enough to stick one song up with a performance video, shot in a studio. Here I am playing the guitar, miming to my song. Stick that up on YouTube. That'll do it.
Right.
No,
No.
no, it won't. You'll get 10,000. You'll get 10,000 views if you're lucky, and that's it. That's your promotional campaign, and it's just not enough anymore. And I think that's why the world of rock music has really struggled over the last, well, it's certainly in the 21st century, has really struggled to maintain equilibrium with the world of urban music, electronic music, and modern pop. They're way ahead in terms of how they engage with their fans and promote the music. So I spent a lot of time just learning, really looking at what those guys were doing, to be fair.
Interesting.
Yeah. Stephen, in terms of obviously we have the album's out now, we have it, really enjoying it. Talk us through the timeline, because obviously, the Future Bites was ready to be released in June 2000. Obviously lockdown then, kicked in before that. At what point in that sort of timeline did you start working on the album? Because obviously you've mentioned about it, and even in the Porcupine Tree interviews you were mentioning about it. So when did that kind of start, and when did it finish being made?
So pretty much as lockdown kicked in, because as you can imagine, I had a lot of plans which were all cancelled, as we all did. We all had plans, and my plan was I was going to go out and tour the Future Bites, and I was going to promote the Future Bites, and I couldn't. I had a tour cancelled. Well, to be fair, I had a tour rescheduled to begin with, and then it was properly cancelled. So essentially I had two planned tours cancelled. And I suddenly found myself with all this time opening up in front of me, kind of in an enforced, isolated situation. And I was like a lot of people, I was like, oh, well, what am I going to do now? So one of the things I did was I started working on my book. Another thing I did was I started the podcast with Tim Bowness. And the third thing I did is I started writing material. And I didn't really have any, as you say, the Future Bites wasn't even out then. So I knew I was under no pressure or rush, self-enforced or otherwise. Yeah. And I just was doing it for fun. And I was just creating music without any agenda at all. And obviously the caveat to that is I kind of always do that. I never really make music, at least not with any particular, not with trying to hit targets or timescales, and I just don't do that. But here, even more so, I think I was making music without any sense of it being for anyone except myself. And I'd say probably about half the album came together fairly early on. Probably the first half of the record came together fairly early on, within a few months. And I started playing it around to friends and getting some great reactions. At the same time, I was also developing the short story as part of the book. So the two began to kind of feed off each other in a way. And I started writing songs which were related to characters and situations in the short story that was in the book, the Harmony Codex. And I just carried on writing very slow. I mean, I took my time. I took about 2 years to write and record this album, all told. And So it was very sporadic. Obviously, there were lots of interruptions, notably releasing and touring a Porcupine Tree record. But it kind of existed before that, during that, and after that. It's hard to put a definite timeline on it. And as I say, I was in no particular rush to finish it, and I was under no particular. I had no particular agenda to make it into anything particular. I say that because obviously when I've done records like The Future Bites, I did have an agenda. My agenda was, this is going to be my electronic pop record.
Yeah.
When I did The Raven That Refused to Sing, this is going to be my old school progressive rock record. When I did Insurgentes, this is going to be my kind of post-punk. So I've always had these kind of right in the back of my mind, these kind of agendas. With this one, I had nothing. I just made music. And I think you can tell, because it's why it's all kind of all over the place, really.
Yeah, and was that very much so rather than it being a kind of, I suppose, a writing process is hard to define, but that was just you working with whatever sort of spontaneous ideas were coming to you at that stage, really?
Yeah, I suppose if I had any agenda at all, it was that I wanted to create, and this is a phrase I've used a lot when I've been talking about this record, was to try and create a kind of piece of cinema for the ears.
Yeah.
So early on, because I kind of acknowledged to myself that the material I was writing was kind of shooting off in all sorts of different directions. 1 minute a kind of acoustic track, then a kind of piece of electronic pop, then this 10-minute ambient thing, and then this sort of jazz prog thing, and all these different things were kind of coming out. I kind of thought to myself, well, this is almost like, this is like a movie where there are scenes, and each scene, different things are happening to the characters. And in one scene, everyone's happy. And then in the next scene, something tragic happens. And then in the next scene, everyone's kind of angry because of what happened in the previous scene. So there's this almost kind of, constant shift in the tone of the piece and the way it flows. And and I'm sure we've talked about this before. I've always liked the idea of music and albums being analogous with cinema. I mean, that's kind of what I grew up with. That's kind of what my dad brainwashed me with, all those years ago by forcing me to listen to Dark Side of the Moon and Tubular Bells when I was a kid, even before I was aware of having any interest in music. So I've always liked that idea of, music as analogous to watching a movie or reading a book. So I guess in a way, this just took that idea to the next level.
But yet it's not. You talked about the short story. It's not. So it sounds like it's the songs were influenced by the short story, or vice versa, rather than strictly, narrative. Is there any way to piece the whole thing together?
Okay, so just to clarify what I was talking about earlier. So when I talk about music having a kind of cinematic flow or a narrative flow or a sense of journey to it, I'm actually talking about the music, not really the lyrics, because I think it is possible to make an album feel like, even an instrumental album, feel like it's telling you a story, feel like it's taking you on a journey. Yeah. So I think I'm talking more. I've shied away for most of my career from making narrative-driven albums because I believe it's an extremely hard thing to pull off. I could probably count on the fingers of one hand the sort of narrative-driven albums that I think really work, because part of the problem is, of course, that then you're bound by the storytelling aspect. Mm-hmm. If I decide a track that I kind of initially planned to open the record works better in the middle of the record, I'm not at liberty to do that if it's telling a story. So I've always shied away a bit from that idea. But to answer your question, everything kind of relates to the album to the story in some way, if only in this idea of the infinite staircase, the idea of it's about the journey, it's not about the destination. Mm-hmm. And I've written about that, obviously going back 20 years to a song like Arriving Somewhere But Not Here. I've embraced this idea over the years of, life is about it's about the journey. You can set goals and you can have ambitions and you can have dreams. Of course you can, but you very rarely get to those points definitively, do you? It's really it's about the ride, and the older I get, the more I kind of realize that, the more I embrace that it's about the things that life kind of throw at you that you don't expect, that you don't plan for, that actually are the most special, magical things of all. So this central kind of idea of the story, the infinite staircase, is kind of present in some way in all the songs. So songs like What Life Brings, very obviously you can see that sentiment reflected in the title.
Cool.
You know what? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Geoff.
No, just said thanks.
A funny story that happened to me yesterday, actually, because I was listening to the record in the car while I was driving. And admittedly, one of the songs, the long ambient title track on the album, first time I heard it, I remember it being sort of a difficult one for me to sort of sit while I was working and listen to. I don't think it maybe is that type of song, right? And so, because I didn't get to experience it like in this listening environment that you were able to set up for everybody. But then I'm driving yesterday in the car and I'm listening to that song. And immediately, I'm not kidding, I felt like I'm in some weird Kubrick movie now. Like this, it was the perfect soundtrack to like driving down a street and looking at people. It was very surreal. When you're writing these kind of songs, especially for this album, one thing that I noticed was they also seem not only varied in styles like you talked about, but also varied in structure, really. They don't follow normal structure, verse, chorus, solo, that kind of thing. Was that part of your intent also, or did writing them in that way just become organic?
I think a bit of both. I mean, there's a sense that throughout my career, every album is a reaction to the previous record. So the last record was had a very strong, what you might call pop sensibility. The songs were structured in more conventional ways. There were choruses, there were things like that. This time around, I think probably in the back of my mind, it was like, okay, I've done that. Now let's go back to something a bit quirkier, a bit more unpredictable. Again, so if we take the movie analogy, you're never quite sure what's around the corner in terms of what the characters are going to go through next. And I like that. It's some of the tracks. I mean, I talk about the album being this very unpredictable journey. And as I think you're kind of picking up on, even some of the tracks within themselves are kind of unpredictable journeys. I mean, a track like Beautiful Scarecrow, which is 5 minutes, it's very compact, but it's got some real surprises in it. There are things that happen in that track that you just would not be expecting when you start listening to the track. And I like that. I like those. Even within within the space of a single song, I like those idea of scenes.
Yeah.
Was it conscious? Probably not. It probably was more of a subconscious thing, just allowing the tracks to unfold and, just wanting to keep myself excited and engaged in the music and trying to do things. I think one of the other things I've said about this project right from the beginning is there was a need for me to feel like I was making music that almost existed outside of any notion of genre. I'm tired of genre, I'm tired of this notion of genres, So, coming back to the kind of artists that I've always admired the most, whether it's Bowie or Kate Bush or Neil Young or Frank Zappa or Nick Cave and these kind of people, it's very hard to say what kind of music these artists make. And I think those are same with directors. What kind of movies did Stanley Kubrick make?
Right.
Well, he made them all.
Movies.
He
Yeah.
He made Kubrick movies. Yeah. Some would say he made the greatest horror movie of all time, the greatest sci-fi movie of all time, the greatest Vietnam movie of all time, the greatest period drama of all time. This guy the point is he was a brilliant filmmaker.
Yeah.
And he could almost move to any genre and make a brilliant piece of work. So I like this idea that, at this stage in my career, even within the songs, it can be a bit mystifying. What genre are we listening to here? Is it electronic? Is it rock? Is it ambient? Is it jazz? Is it industrial? And I like that. And again, it's not necessarily a very self-conscious thing. I think it's just allowing my natural curiosity about what's possible with music will kind of flow without overthinking it too much. Hey Mia, I'm just in the middle of an interview. Hey.
I know.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question or not. I can't remember what your question was now.
Yeah. No, some writers talk about how if you can just play the song on an acoustic, then that means it's a good song, right? But I think maybe with the stuff on this album, it seems like almost the rhythms, the production, the sounds, all of that are equally as important, if not more so, on certain things than if you just picked up a guitar and played it. I mean, how do you look at the songs in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I don't completely subscribe to that theory anyway. That's a very sort of Beatles-centric theory, isn't it? That great songs you must be able to play them on the piano or the guitar. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true of a lot of modern music. And there are some fantastic pieces of music which are ambient, which are jazz, which are purely rhythmic, which you could never play, on the guitar. I mean, I love creating sound worlds. And again, it's kind of a very cinematic notion. And you mentioned this when you were listening to the title track. It kind of took you to a place, took you to an environment. And that's the beautiful thing about a lot of ambient music which is more about texture, music which is more about atmosphere rather than melody or catchy choruses.
Right.
There is so much music that exists outside of the world of the sort of Bob Dylan, Beatles kind of archetypes. And I think this is another thing that rock has allowed itself to get left behind. We're so attached to the Beatles archetype and the Bob Dylan archetype. Meanwhile, electronic and urban music is out there just innovating, and it's way ahead because it's throwing out all of these old notions of the way Lennon and McCartney wrote songs and the way Bob Dylan wrote songs. And I think there's been, there's a tradition of great rock artists that have always played with the possibilities of structure. And a lot of them come from the progressive scene, progressive music itself, because I know you guys are from that sort of scene. So progressive music itself was all about doing away, wasn't it, with traditional song structures?
Yeah.
And I've always said that the one thing, and I think it's the only thing that all quote unquote progressive music has in common, is it does away with the idea of conventional song structures. And it allows music to unfold in a more unpredictable way. Yeah. And so to come back to your original question, I mean, I'm as inspired by, great rhythms as I am by great, interesting sounds. I worked a lot with modular synths on this album, just messing about. And I don't really know what I'm doing on modular synths. I'm still very much approaching it in a very naive way. And finding that's great because I'm finding things that are outside of my own set of cliches, my own comfort zone, because I don't really know what I'm doing. So that's been another aspect of this album, actually working a lot more with analog synths and not really, understanding a lot of the time what I'm doing, but knowing when I'm onto something. I think that's the trick is, knowing when something is worth pursuing. Yeah.
I think one of the great things about, I said to someone that the album to me kind of represents a really, really good summary of a whole lot of the things that Steven Wilson has been involved in kind of one sort of capsule. And I think the big thing for me is that, again, a lot of the artists that I've enjoyed, you go and explore the avenues that they're suggesting or that they talk about in interviews. And I think that, I can remember, I think it was, Ultravox did a cover of Brian Eno's King's Lead Hat on a B-side or something, and we went and checked out that album, and then we got another Brian Eno album and found out, it's an ambient one, it's completely different. Mm-hmm. I think I think probably a lot of prog fans, despite being tied to a genre as well, they like exploring a whole lot of different things. If I think of our group of people, we have a common thread, but there's the guys who go off in the Metallica you know, opus direction. You know, there's the people who go in the pop direction. There's people who like different things. It's really good. But Stephen, I wanted to talk about a very important thing linked to the album, and I guess linked to you and the work you do, has been you know, the whole Dolby Atmos, the immersive experience of music. And I said before we started, I'd got to attend the event in Earth last week, which was a playthrough of the album. Interesting. And you talk about music being cinematic. And the thing that was really kind of interesting for me was you were in this venue that effectively was a theater or like a gig, but there was nothing to look at. Really interesting to kind of, you know, everything that you needed to experience was purely sound. And I was trying to think, you know, I don't think I've ever experienced that before. What was that? And then you obviously did the set afterwards. What was that whole event like for you?
Well, I think it was, firstly, if I could just talk about the live portion of the show. I mean, that was kind of a little bit of an extra afterthought. The idea originally was, let's get 600 fans in a week of release. Let's turn the lights off and let's play them the record in spatial audio through. And the reason I chose that venue is because they do have this incredible spatial audio system.
Yeah.
The live thing was a bit of an experiment to see if I could do a gig without a guitar around my neck. That was the bottom line, really. I've never done a gig without well, not since the very early days of No Man, anyway. I've not done a gig as a keyboard player. I can't think of if I've done anything like that. You know, for decades, and so it was a little bit of an experiment, dipping my toe in the water to see, well, what would it be like to sort of present some of these songs, the more electronic songs, with, you know, with a bunch of analog synths around me. So that was fun. I enjoyed that. Just coming back to your original point, though, I mean, I think one of the things that I knew was going to be very important way up front with this record was getting people in to listen to it in spatial audio. And we started doing events playing the album back in spatial 3 months ago. It was the only part of the campaign which really kind of started, you know, before this, you know, 4-week window. We were doing playbacks for fans and media back in June, and really trying to, well, first of all, trying to push the envelope in terms of what's possible with spatial audio, because I've done a lot of spatial audio mixes over the last few years, as you know. In fact, I started in 5.1 15 years ago. So I've been in this world of spatial audio for a long time now, and Atmos has come along, kind of raised the bar in terms of what's possible. And I started doing Atmos mixes 3 or 4 years ago, and learned got a lot of experience by doing other people's records. And I thought, okay, well, if you're going to do your record, you should really try and, you know, make yours the definitive spatial audio experience. Show people what you can do with this format. And it looks like it's here to stay, I have to say, because Atmos has been embraced now by so many market leaders like Apple and Amazon now, and it looks like it's actually going to stick around in a way that Quad never did, in a way that 5.1 never quite took off. And so it's wonderful for the first time in my career to be actually at the forefront of something, you know. So I think, you know, in the back of my mind, I had this conceit, which was, and it is a conceit, I acknowledge this, but it was this conceit that I want to do for Atmos what Dark Side of the Moon did for stereo in the 70s. I want to try at least to make a record that people who are just getting into Atmos, and we're just at the cusp now of a big change in terms of people's listening habits, hopefully moving more towards that. I want to make a record that people will reach for when they want to show off their spatial audio system. You know, you can do this. You know, you've got all the experience, you've got the music, you've got this record which is very layered, which is very diverse. There's a lot of sound design elements to it, little details, textures, moments, which will lend themselves beautifully to making some kind of, you know, definitive spatial audio experience. So that was the conceit in my mind. Whether I achieved it or not, time will tell. But certainly I wanted to make something that would blow some minds. And I wanted to get people that had never heard spatial audio along to hear the album for the first time in that way. And I think a lot of people had quite a profound experience because they'd never heard anything. I mean, you mentioned, this never had an experience quite like that. I think that was my goal, was to give people a really, I don't want to say life-changing, but something they'd never experienced before in relation to this album.
Well, I had heard the stream of the album to do our review of it, but even so, I mean, it was, it just exploded hearing it in that environment, having listened to a stream of it before, and it was a fantastic event. In terms of you talked about having done it for atmospheric mixes and 5.1 before that for a variety of artists. How do you choose? What's your process for choosing what you're going to work on?
Well, I mean, I very rarely go out and solicit the work. There's been a couple of times when I have. I'll be quite honest and say I definitely pursued XTC, one of my favorite bands. But generally speaking, I wait for invitations, and I get a lot of those. I'm in a very fortunate position now where I think with spatial audio taking off so much now, I get a lot of requests. I get a lot of invitations. What a nice problem to have. And I'm in a very, very fortunate position of being able to pick the ones I really feel passionate about. So if I've done something, if I've remixed something, you can pretty much guess and bet that it's an album I genuinely love. And I genuinely know the record very well, because I feel like the very few times I've taken on jobs of records that I wasn't necessarily a big fan of, I don't think I did a good job, or I don't think I did a job as good as I should have done. And I don't think I did a job as good as somebody that really genuinely loved those records would have done. So I learned that quite early on, that the records I would do the best job on would be, and it stands to reason, doesn't it? Yeah, the records I would do the best job on would be the ones I genuinely felt deeply attached to, whether through growing up with the records or more recently discovering them. But I felt like I had the fans' perspective, if that makes sense.
And what would your is there anything that is kind of the holy grail that you would like to do or haven't been able to do because there's no multi-tracks? Or
it's such a long list. We'd be here all day. I mean, it's I've got a lot. You can see I've got a lot of records in my collection, and all the records I've got in my collection, probably without exception, I'll probably be very happy to remix them into spatial audio. So, I mean, there are so many. I'd love to do Kate Bush's catalog. Yeah. I'd love to get my hands on any corner of the Floyd catalog that James Guthrie didn't want to do. I'd love to get my hands on, the Talks catalog. There's so many, it's almost endless. Yeah. But the ones I have been able to do, I already consider myself incredibly honored and privileged to have been able to do some of my favorite music of all time. It's incredible. What a great job I have.
Great, absolutely.
I wanted to ask you about one album in particular, and just very short kind of addendum to this, because Geoff and I happen to be very big fans. One of the bands that we got to know each other for our love of all the progressive rock bands and stuff like that, but we also found that we were really big Def Leppard fans for many, many years. And then we were completely shocked to see you work on their last record to do a spatial audio thing, the Diamond Star Halos. And I'm just curious how that even came about and what that was like for you, because it's not you and Def Leppard together in one thing. It was not something I think anybody would have ever thought.
No, I guess there is a slight addendum to what I was saying earlier, which is that during COVID, I took on a few things that I might not have taken on otherwise because I had the time. And Kiss was another one.
Yeah, right.
I've never been a Kiss fan particularly, but you know what? I really enjoyed doing that record because it's a Bob Ezrin production. So it's really...
We're talking about Destroyer, right? That's the one.
Destroyer, yeah. So it's a fascinating production. It's very bombastic. It was a lot of fun to do. And I guess I have a similar perspective on Def Leppard. Never one of my favorite bands, but Joe is lovely. I love, Joe Elliott, real sweet guy. And I was a guy from the record company said to me, would you be interested in doing the new Def Leppard album? And I'm like, well, I've never really been a Leppard, but send it over and let me have a listen to it. And I really liked it. And I thought, you know what, I could do this. So there are exceptions to my rule. There are things that, as I say, that I take on and I grow to really like them while I'm working on them.
Yeah.
Because I think the process very often of deconstructing and reconstructing music, mixing in stereo or mixing it in surround, does give you a better understanding and a deeper respect for the artistry involved. So yeah, that was that. Yes, no, you're right to pick that as a kind of outlier. It was an outlier, but I really grew to love working on it, and I loved the music by the end of it.
Oh, it was great for us to have a chance to check that out. We loved it. Before we let you go, just real quick, because we didn't even ask about this, and it's shocking because time flies so crazy. But you just Porcupine Tree. I have to say that I was able to go to New York and see the Radio City show, and it was just such a massive highlight for me last year to check out and have the new album. Hey, it's Bowie, right?
Bowie.
Yeah, he joined us in our last interview you had on.
Did he? Wow, he's such a gate crasher.
What a great dog. But anyway, just recap a little bit. I know you've talked about it, but how you look back on that and now, looking back and for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. We really enjoyed it in a way that we probably never enjoyed it in the previous incarnation. I think there was a sense of it being, I wouldn't say without any sense of pressure, but there was a lot less pressure this time around. There was no pressure to try and make it into something it wasn't, because it was kind of a one-off thing, and we had a great time touring together, and it was great to see so many people that had probably never got the chance to see the band 15 years ago. A lot of young kids coming to the shows, and whole families coming, dads bringing their sons and daughters to shows and stuff like that. And it was great to play that old music. It was great to play the newer music as well. It was great to be playing bigger venues than we ever played. Certainly in Europe, we were playing arenas, which was amazing. It was great to give it, and this is of course assuming that it is a kind of ending, because it may not be. I don't think we're ruling out another possible reunion somewhere in the future. But if this was the end, it felt like a much more pleasing way to end the story than I think had been left hanging in the air prior to that.
Yeah, I mean, when you went into Blackest Eyes in the beginning, it immediately took me back to seeing you guys in a club in Tampa, Florida, before things got really bigger, and it was just really cool to see again and in a bigger, see you guys go from that to that, at Radio City. It was like phenomenal. It was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that Radio City is a great. We actually did do Radio City on the last tour we'd done back in 2010, I think it was.
It's a great place for shows.
It's a great place, but the atmosphere this time couldn't have been more different. We were just having fun. It was a joyous experience, whereas it really hadn't been towards the end of the previous incarnations. So it was so nice to actually be able to enjoy, playing that music.
Yeah. Well, great talking to you. Great. Thank you for giving us a lot of time. Congrats on all the continued success. The new album, Harmony Codex, is out now. It's everywhere. You can't miss it. YouTube, streaming, get the physical product. If there's any left after Geoff bought them all. And
look,
Geoff?
I even made myself a Lego object.
Oh, brilliant. I've got one too.
Oh,
I don't have one.
That's
yeah. You made it out of Lego. That's awesome. That's
Lego
great.
and super. It's the cardinal Lego and super glue. It's the cardinal sin, because obviously you can't have a bit. Lego doesn't stick across the ways, right?
Of course. Yeah. Still, that's very inventive, very creative of you, sir. Yes, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. All right, Stephen. Have a great rest of your day. Pleasure talking to you, man.
Likewise. Thanks, guys.
Bye
for
now.
See ya.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on all our socials and on ProgReport.com for all your news, interviews, reviews, and more. And we'll see you again real soon.